My father's 60th birthday party was the kind of event that takes 3 months to plan and 20 minutes to ruin. My aunt had reserved the private dining room at Rosewood Grill, the one with the heavy velvet curtains and the brass light fixtures that make everyone look slightly more important than they are. There were centerpieces made of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus, a custom cake from the bakery on 5th that my mother had driven 40 minutes each way to select, and a slideshow running on loop near the bar that showed my father, at every age, looking progressively more satisfied with himself. 52 people had RSVP'd. The DeLuca family did not do things quietly. I arrived from Austin on a Thursday night, 2 days before the party, because my mother had asked me to come early and help with the finishing touches, which turned out to mean readdressing 40 envelopes she'd already addressed, and listening to my aunt explain the seating chart for 90 minutes. I didn't mind. That's always been my role. The one who shows up early. The one who handles the quiet logistics. The one who does something with computers and data that nobody asks about at dinner. My name is Petra. I'm 31 years old. And in the DeLuca family, that has always meant the youngest daughter. The one who left for Texas. The one who never quite fit the mold my parents had already finished shaping by the time I arrived. My older brother Marcus is 42. He runs the front-of-house operations for my father's restaurant group. 4 Italian-American concepts across suburban New Jersey, all named after women in our family. My sister, Nina, is 38. She handles the finances, the vendor contracts, the payroll. She has an MBA from Rutgers and uses it like a credential in every conversation. My father, Sal, built everything from a single sandwich counter in Hoboken in 1989. He is the kind of man who thinks pride and love are the same emotion, expressed differently depending on the audience. My mother, Connie, is the kind of woman who asks if you've eaten within 30 seconds of seeing you, and then answers for you before you can respond. "You look tired," she said when I walked in Thursday night. "I'm fine, Mom. You're always fine." She handed me a stack of envelopes and a calligraphy pen. Fine doesn't mean anything. I took my usual chair at the kitchen table, the one slightly too far from the center of the room, and I got to work. The party itself was on a Saturday. By 7 o'clock the private dining room was warm with noise and wine. My father was holding court near the bar the way he always did. Jacket off, sleeves rolled, laughing louder than anyone else in the room. He had that quality some people have where they make a room feel like it exists for them. I'd spent 31 years orbiting that quality. I was at table 4 with my cousins Addie and Flynn's husband Terrence, who had a lot of opinions about the Giants and almost no opinions about anything else. I was used to table 4. Table 4 was the radius outside which the real conversations happened. The real conversation happened, as it always did, when my father stood up to speak. He tapped his glass with a butter knife, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when everyone already knows they're supposed to. 60 years, he said. And I still feel like I'm just getting started. Applause. Genuine, warm, unrehearsed. He talked about the business for a while. The way he always did, because the business was how my father expressed gratitude and love and ambition all at once. He talked about what it meant to him to have built something his family could stand inside of. He said the word legacy 3 times. Then Marcus stood beside him, and they did the thing they always did, the father-son doubleheader. "We've got some news," Marcus said, grinning. "We signed the lease on location 5 last Tuesday, Bellamy's, New Brunswick, opening next spring." The room erupted. My mother covered her mouth. Nina raised her glass. 40 million in projected revenue by year 3. My father added with the quiet authority of a man who has said large numbers out loud many times and knows how they land. "We're not slowing down." I raised my glass with everyone else. Later, when the speeches were done and the cake had been cut, and people had migrated into smaller clusters, I found myself near the corner of the bar next to my father and Marcus and Nina, because that's where I ended up sometimes. Adjacent to the center, never quite in it. My father was explaining the financing structure for Bellamy's. A new investor group had come in, he said. Private equity, New York-based. Solid track record, well-capitalized, very selective. They'd been the bridge between the lease signing and the first construction draw. "They're not loud," my father said. "Don't do a lot of press. But they've been solid. This is the second deal we've done together." I had gone very still. "How much is the bridge?" I asked. My father looked at me with the specific expression that means he's deciding how gentle to be. "About 300,000. It's covered. We're structured." "I could help with that," I said. The corner of the bar went quiet, not the whole room, just that radius. The specific quiet that means something slightly unexpected has entered the conversation. Nina recovered first. She didn't laugh exactly. It was more of an exhale, soft enough to be deniable. "That's sweet," she said. "I'm serious," I said. "What's the investor group called?" "Petra." My father's voice had the careful quality it gets when he is trying to be kind without being direct. "This is institutional money. It's not the same as, this is a different world. I know what institutional bridge financing is, Dad." Marcus reached for his drink. It's not about whether you know what it is. It's about whether you can actually look. 300,000 isn't nothing. Even if you had it, you'd be putting yourself in a complicated position. Family and business finance is messy. You'd be out of your depth, Nina said. Matter-of-factly, not unkindly, no offense. Untaken, I said. I looked at my father. He looked at his drink. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my operations director, a man named Calvin who had worked with me since the beginning and who answered messages at any hour without complaint. The message was 9 words. Pull the Hargrove file. I need the DeLuca exposure summer summary. The party continued around me. My father talked about the timeline for Bellamy's. Marcus talked about the design firm they'd hired. Nina talked about the soft launch strategy. They passed appetizers around and clinked glasses and were genuinely a warm and loving family, doing what warm and loving families do. I was a guest in that warmth. Invited. Included in a general sense. Never quite consulted. At some point my father mentioned the name of the investor group. Hargrove Capital Strategies. He said it the way people say the names of things they trust but don't fully understand, with a kind of reverent shorthand, as if the name itself were proof of stability. They don't take meetings with just anyone, he said. We got lucky. My phone buzzed once. Your holdings entity holds 34% LP interest in Hargrove Fund 2. Secondary stake in Fund 3 is 19%. Combined exposure to DeLuca Restaurant Group across both vehicles is approx. 21M. They don't know. I turned my phone face down on the bar. Sounds like good partners, I said. The best, my father agreed. Some people just know how to build the right relationships. He didn't look at me when he said it. My father's phone rang at 9:47. He almost ignored it. We were mid-conversation about the new chef Nina had recruited for Bellamy's. She'd poached him from a place in Philadelphia, which my father kept pronouncing a real get. But something about the caller ID made him pause. He excused himself to the hallway. We heard the shift in his voice before we could hear his words. That particular drop in register, the one that means something has gone wrong, and the person is trying to understand how wrong. Marcus and Nina exchanged a look. I took a sip of water. When my father came back to the table, he looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting furniture and found the floor missing. Hargrove, he said. There's been an internal restructuring. They've suspended their position in our project, both of them. Silence. What does that mean? My mother asked from across the table. She'd appeared without anyone noticing, the way mothers do. It means the bridge financing on Bellamy's doesn't exist right now. It means the construction draw next month. He stopped. I don't understand. We had a signed commitment letter. Marcus was already on his phone. I'm calling the attorney. Call the bank first, Nina said. I'm calling both. The birthday party dissolved into something else. Phones out, voices low, the custom cake still sitting half-eaten on the side table. The hydrangeas were suddenly absurd. Nina looked at me from across the bar. I don't know what she was looking for. Maybe just a neutral face. Do you know anything about this? She asked. Not accusatory. She genuinely seemed to think I might have a useful data point. An outside perspective. A little, I said. My father looked up. The fund is called Hargrove Capital Strategies, I said, but the operating entity is structured through a Delaware holding company. That's why it's hard to trace. They're actually quite well capitalized. The fund is around 400 million total. But they're private. Very private. They don't list partners publicly. How do you know that? Marcus asked. I research investment vehicles. It's part of what I do. You research restaurant finance companies from Austin? He frowned. I research a lot of things. Nobody researches a private fund that carefully without a reason. My father was looking at me now, slowly, the way he looks at things when he's recalculating. Petra. His voice was very even. What's your reason? I looked at him for a long moment. Check your email, I said. I just sent you something from my other account. He picked up his phone. His eyes moved across the screen once. Then his hand lowered to the bar. Slowly, the way things lower when the person holding them has stopped being sure of anything. Read it out loud, I said quietly. He didn't move for a moment, then barely above a whisper. Hargrove Capital Strategies. Principal ownership disclosure. Controlling interest, 81%. Managing partner and primary stakeholder. He stopped. His jaw was tight. He couldn't finish the sentence. I'll finish it, I said. Petra don't. Managing partner and primary stakeholder, Petra R. DeLuca. Total assets under management across Hargrove Fund 2 and Fund 3, $412 million. The corner of the bar was absolutely silent. Marcus made a sound that wasn't a word. Nina put her glass down carefully, like it had become fragile. My mother, who had moved closer during the reading without anyone noticing, sat down in an empty chair. You're Hargrove, my father said. I've been Hargrove for 3 years, I said. 3 years and 4 months. Petra. He said my name like it was a question he didn't know how to finish. How? I folded my hands on the bar. This was the part I'd been carrying for a long time. Not with anger. Anger had never quite been the right word for it. With something heavier than anger and quieter. Something that had weight without heat. When I moved to Austin at 23, I said, I had $11,000 and a piece of software I'd built for supply chain logistics. I sold the first licensing deal 18 months later for a little under $2 million. I didn't celebrate. I put it to work. I made mistakes. I made better decisions after the mistakes. I kept going. I looked at my father. I learned from you, I said, not directly. You never sat me down to teach me anything about how money works, about how to read a deal, about when to move and when to wait. You taught Marcus those things. You taught Nina. But I was always in the room when you talked about the business. And I was always paying attention, even when you'd already assumed I was just there to clear the plates. $400 million, Nina said faintly. 412, I said. As of last quarter. And you've been investing it in us? Marcus's voice had something in it I didn't have a word for. Something between awe and something that looked like shame. I've been investing it in well-structured restaurant groups with strong unit economics and a proven operator at the helm. The fact that the operator was my father was relevant, but it wasn't sentiment. Every dollar I put into the DeLuca restaurant group was a calculated decision based on track record, location analysis, and lease structure. I paused. You build good restaurants, all of you. I have never doubted that. Then why? Marcus stopped. He tried again. Why pull the funding? Why tonight? Why at Dad's birthday? I looked at him for a long moment. Because tonight, I said. When I offered to help close a $300,000 gap, a number that is, relative to my actual position, approximately what you spend on a single equipment refresh. You told me I'd be out of my depth. Dad called it a different world. Nina said I'd be in over my head. No offense. I kept my voice even. It wasn't hard. I'd had a long time to sit with this. I have been quietly helping keep this company funded through a supply chain crisis and 2 rate cycles. And tonight, at this table, at my father's 60th birthday party, I was still the one who doesn't quite understand how real business works. The velvet curtains were very still. The slideshow was still running near the bar. My father at 30, at 40, at 50, grinning at the camera. My father put his face in his hands. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said. I need to be clear about that. I'm not doing this to humiliate anyone or to make a point about who matters more. I'm doing this because something needed to shift. And I had tried, in smaller ways for a long time. And you weren't looking. My mother was the first to speak. How long? She asked. Not accusing, genuinely wanting to know. How long have you been sitting on this? The first investment in Hargrove Fund I was before you opened Location 3. I said. The one on Route 9 that you said wasn't going to work. I thought it would. I was right. I looked at her. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to say anything. Every time I tried to be part of the conversation had already moved on. My father lowered his hands. His eyes were red at the edges. My father, Sal DeLuca, who I had never once seen cry. Not at funerals, not at weddings, not at the hospital the night my grandfather died. Looked like a man who had just understood something he should have understood a decade ago and couldn't get the years back. Petra, he said. Tell me what you're sorry for, I said. Not to be cruel. Because it mattered what the words actually were. He was quiet for a moment. For not asking, he said. I built this whole thing, and I talked about it constantly, and I never once asked you what you were building. I taught your brother and your sister everything I knew, and then acted like you didn't want to know. But you were learning anyway, and I missed it. He looked at the bar, then back at me. That's on me, completely. I'm sorry, Marcus spoke without waiting for anyone to prompt him. I've been dismissing you since you were 22 years old, he said. I told myself it was because you were in tech. It was a different world. It was too different from what we do. But that's not why. I already had a picture of who you were, and I never updated it. That's on me too. I'm sorry, Petra. He looked at the table. Nina didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I said you'd be out of your depth. She shook her head slowly. I have an MBA and I said that to someone sitting on $400 million. But more than that, I said it about my own sister, at my own father's birthday party, without knowing anything about what you'd actually built. That's not something I can explain away. She met my eyes. I'm sorry, I mean that. My mother reached across and put her hand over mine. She didn't add anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, You built something extraordinary, and somehow we made you feel like it had to be a secret. That's not a family doing its job. We have to do better. I looked around at all of them. Here's what I want, I said. I'll restore the Hargrove position. Full capital reinstatement. Bellamy's moves forward on the original timeline. The construction draw happens when it's supposed to. I let that sit for a second. But I'm not staying invisible anymore. I want to be part of the real conversations about this business. Not as a silent backer who no one knows about. As a partner. Someone who gets consulted when there's a decision to make, not informed after the fact if at all. I want to know about locations before they're signed. I want to be in the room. I've earned that. My father stood up. He walked around the bar and stood in front of me, and he looked at me the way I had always wanted him to look at me. Actually looked, the way you look at something when you finally stopped, assuming you already know what it is. You've always been in the room, he said. I just kept talking like you weren't. He put his hand out, I shook it. Then I called Calvin. Restore the Hargrove position, I said. Full reinstatement, and add a supplemental draw of $800,000 for the Bellamy's build-out expansion. The original budget was conservative. Tell them we're going with the better kitchen. I paused. Yes, I'm sure. Happy birthday to my dad. I hung up and looked at my family. Really looked at them. At my brother, who was looking at the bar like he was reorganizing something in his head. At my sister, who was looking at me like she was seeing something she'd been looking at for years finally come into focus. At my mother, whose hands was still on top of mine. The funding will be back in place by Monday, I said. Bellamy's opens on time. It's a good location. I'd have backed it regardless. My father laughed, a real one. Surprised out of him, the kind you can't produce on purpose. You would have? He asked. New Brunswick is underserved at your price point. The demographics support a 60-seat full-service concept. The lease terms are reasonable. I looked at him. You picked a good spot. You always pick good spots. That's why I kept investing. He shook his head slowly. Not in disbelief. In something that looked more like gratitude. The kind that arrives late and knows it. I want to hear about what you've built, he said. All of it. From the beginning. It's a long story, I said. I've got time, he said. It's my birthday. Later, after the dinner plates had been cleared and the guests had thinned out, and the hydrangeas had started to droop slightly at the edges, my mother found me out in the small courtyard behind the restaurant. The one with the bistro lights and the old iron table where the staff takes their breaks. She came out without her shoes, which meant she'd been on her feet too long and didn't care anymore. She sat down across from me without saying anything right away. She looked at the lights for a moment. Then she said, I knew you were smart. I always knew. You knew I was good with computers, I said. That's how I understood it, she said. I didn't have a better category. She was quiet for a moment. That's not an excuse. That's just what it was. I know. I should have made a better category. She looked at me. You kept calling. Every Sunday. Even when we talked about everything except what you were actually doing, you kept showing up. I should have been more curious about who I was talking to. You were curious, I said. You just asked the wrong questions. She smiled at that, a little. It was the right kind of honesty, the kind that makes a smile possible. I'm going to ask better ones, she said. I know you will. She reached over and adjusted the collar of my jacket, the way she'd been doing since I was 7 years old, without asking permission, without thinking about it. Just a reflex, just the way she knew to be close. I didn't move away. The courtyard was quiet. Through the window, I could see my father and Marcus and Nina at the big table, leaning toward each other, talking the way they talked when something real was happening. But the seat at the end, the one that had always been mine, slightly removed, slightly outside the radius, was empty now. I'd ask for a different chair next time. One closer to the center. I'd earned that too. $412 million. And what I'd actually needed was for someone to ask me a better question. Turns out the hardest things to build are never the ones that show up in the balance sheet.